go to the phones. Calling from a 510 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me? Am I on?
Yes, you are. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Okay, this is James. I'm from Hudson, New York, or that's where I'm living now.
Okay, Hudson, New York. I know it well.
Oh, great. Yeah, so I was calling. Watch a lot of the show and sort of tuned into the tenor that the kind of the sort of itchiness of the Warren-Sanders difference is happening. And I'm kind of like, I want one of them to win the primary, basically. I'm like, I just need... So I guess my question is, because I had some urge to defend Warren a little against Mike, but I think that my main feeling is I wanted to know, like, there is this difference between the Warren Sanders voters, and like, if it comes down to Warren Sanders Harris or Warren Sanders Biden, is there a coalition, or is there a way that a coalition can be formed either behind Sanders or behind Warren? And like, I don't know, like, what is your feeling about the strategy there?
My guess is that in the event that it comes down to three people like that, we're going to see it play out in the convention. I mean, it really depends on who the three people are to a certain extent. I don't know how that gets resolved between Warren and Sanders voters, because I definitely think that the polling shows that they are distinct entities, and there's not as much crossover as you would imagine based upon their policy sets. I would guess. I think it's just too early to sort of say how people are going to react. And it's also too early, I think, because I think you need to see more in the debates to see if Warren or Sanders can convince the other voters that they are their number two, right?
I just want to just say, I mean, look, I'm going to, I think that I treat Warren fairly, and I obviously am not going to pretend that again, to me, it is. I just think it's not even a difference of one being better than the other. It's just a different kind of candidate, and Bernie represents a certain kind of class politics. And then if you include, foreign and military policy, which I think, yes, we can say all day people don't care about it, but it's utterly reckless and narcissistic for Americans not to care about it on some level, frankly. And I'll make that as a hard stop statement. So I think I think what's been interesting to me, though, is I think in the narrower conversations of people who are like very high information news consumers, like you, that this debate is pretty relevant, and there are people bouncing in between Warren and Sanders. But I think, as Sam is saying, a lot of the polling indicates that there's a lot more like Sanders to Biden or Biden to Sanders, as an example. And I don't read that necessarily as people not caring about ideology to the same degree that Sam might. I also read it as basically, in some respects, a manifestation that, as an example, that, Sanders' support right now is much more, frankly, of a much broad class base. And I think the simplicity of the message and the clarity of it is very distinct and very beneficial. But I guess the bigger point is I don't think criticizing candidates one way or another is something you need to worry about right now.
Definitely. I guess my sorry.
Well, let me just comment on what Michael said, then you can go. To the extent that there is you may be making a class, but it's a cultural thing. That to the extent that Sanders and Biden share voters from the same class, they're not doing a Marxist critique and it's bringing them to Biden.
No. I didn't say a Marxist critique.
There are cultural.
Well, what cultural things do you think those are? I don't think it's just cultural.
I think it's their. I think it has to do with sort of like maleness.
You think that, but you wait. So wait. But that doesn't make any sense because we both know that if you cut it across class line, no, because as a matter of fact, Bernie's coalition is significantly more diverse than Warren's.
I understand, but I don't know. I agree.
So why?
I'm saying,
I think a woman.
I'm saying the crossover, the people who want Biden number 2. And it's not even the majority of Bernie voters, but it is the plurality of Bernie voters. I think that they are responding to cultural cues. The Joe Biden, Amtrak Joe.
Those
I think they're
cultural
responding
cues overlap with class cues, frankly, if you want to use that language. I'll just be anecdotal because this is what I think what's going on. So my grandmother, as an example, she's Bernie or Biden. She supports universal health care. She has a labor union background. And Bernie has gotten through to her as somebody who actually represents more of a continuation of good, solid labor politics. And then she just happens to like Biden and doesn't, by the way, perceive him to be as bad on those issues as I'm telling her. But it's not because she's like, oh, well, he's a dude. And she's not drawn to Warren.
He's a dude. It's because
she's not drawn to
he has all the cultural cues of someone who is labor friendly.
Right. Okay, but then we're sort of saying a similar thing then, and I wouldn't necessarily frame that as just quote unquote cultural, right? Like, just because the cultural cues are cueing for cares about working people and has a labor agenda. Whereas, in Warren's case, and I think it's important for people to reference this outside of these circles, she doesn't find all of the endless wonkery to be interesting or impressive. And I think
the irony is that Elizabeth Warren cares a lot more about working class people than Biden.
Absolutely, right. That one I completely agree with you on. But it's not it's not a social conservatism or maleness that is driving her.
Well, I am not convinced that those things are not also. These things are all bound up in ways, in part on how they're represented within the context of American society. People, when they think about unions, I think broadly speaking, Americans, when they think about a typical union member, they picture in their mind a guy, even though the fact of the matter is that
this is somebody who's a union member her whole life who also liked Hillary Clinton. Yeah, so I don't know if I want to
go ask your
psychobabble it to that degree.
Go ask your grandma to describe a typical union member. I'd be curious as to what gender they decide.
Well, she would describe herself.
Let's hear the caller.
Sam. Okay.
Caller, you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
She would describe somebody else.
I don't know.
You see?
She might.
I don't think so.
What's up? Am I still on?
Go ahead, caller. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, anyway, well, I think I'll take the rest of this stuff off there, but I think it's funny because my family is sort of the opposite where, I was on vacation and I was convincing my aunt and my mom and telling them all about the Hyde Amendment and kind of Biden's campaigning for these sort of very, basically kind of anti-abortion,
right.
or, pro-choice, pro-life, Democrats and all this. And I could sort of move the needle to Warren, but I could never, when I said blah, 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 Sanders, they kind of would bring up, shit he said about Nicaragua in the 80s or something, that stench still hung around, and so it's a question to me partially.
I wouldn't call that a stench.
Well, let go ahead. Well, let the caller just finish the point.
Oh, anyway, I just feel like the way Michael says about there's people that just they don't like Sanders and they're not really convincible. I mean, certainly like my family with this kind of Ivy League background, they're exactly the demographic of like Warren convincibles, where they will move left from Harris or Biden to Warren, but I can't, for exactly these cultural reasons, I don't know if I can get them to move to Sanders. And I just wonder, what is I guess I'm just asking, like, what is the math of like, how many, there's like people that are sort of Sanders convincibles and then there's people that are Warren convincibles. And of course, then there's the candidate that you actually approve of. And I don't know. I've been wondering all about
it's
anyway.
I think, okay, I appreciate the call. I'll answer it off air. I mean, the polling shows that there is a greater number of people like your family who will discount Bernie than Warren. Warren, at least a month or two ago, had a slightly higher ceiling but also a lower floor than Bernie. It remains to be seen, because the other thing that may be driving like sort of Bernie and Biden supporters to be shared is that people may perceive that Bernie has a better chance of winning. And certainly, I imagine that is why, Bernie's support amongst African Americans is like 3 times that of Warren. And I imagine that comes into play, but I also imagine the idea of like, of just the movement building that Bernie is doing, and the involvement that Bernie had in civil rights movement that Warren did not have. I mean, and so I think you're going to be able to find people who can move from Biden to Bernie and people who can move from Biden to Warren. And I think the campaign is going to sort out, to a certain extent, 3/4 of the people who will move to one candidate or another when that time comes. Because it's very conceivable. I think, if I had to predict right now, I would say that there's going to be 3 or 4 people who are going to be in this race well into the spring. And I would imagine that Warren may be one of them. Bernie's certainly going to be one of them. And but
I think I would also just really encourage people that if you dig into these polls and again talk to like normal people, that I will use my grandmother in this instance, that the strengths that he had, that exactly the dynamic we're articulating outside of very narrow but highly overrepresented confines in academia and media are his strengths. And they're going to be big strengths for normal people that you have to appeal to actually win things.
What do you mean by what specifically?
Like a simple, clear message. Like, we're going to just do this without means testing it. A lot of the kind of elevation of technocracy and wonkery doesn't necessarily translate as well to a broader set of people. And I also think that the history of movement politics is a significant distinction as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the movement thing is a big deal, but I think to a certain extent, the details of the plans, I don't think is what moves people to Warren. I think it's this perception that she says, I have a plan.
Right, but I'm saying we're in the phase now where there's a lot of people engaging who fancy themselves sort of like in the process in a certain way. I'm just saying, when you talk to normal people and you say one plan, okay, most candidates' plans do nothing about student loans, right? One candidate's plans just eliminates them. No bullshit, no complications, no form, no nonsense. Let's just do it. And the other one, it's like, well, sort of, yes, but then you have to fill out a bunch of paperwork. That outside of a pretty narrow set of people, their eyes glaze over and they're less excited about that general type of approach.
Well, all right. I mean, I think I happen to agree that we should get rid of everyone's student debt, but saying we're going to get rid of everyone's student debt who makes under $100,000 a year is a fairly straightforward pitch. I happen to think that we should get rid of student debt, but I don't think it's.
I think we have a lot of evidence about what is more
you go out there
durable
and say
and
yes,
easier to communicate. We'll
okay.
see.
I hope you're right about that.